Welcome to Maine Concerns, where our news team gives you a closer look at the events that happened around Maine this week.
Good morning. Thanks for joining us. I'm your host, Cindy Campbell. On today's program, we're focusing on emergency medical services like EMTs and paramedics, a field that desperately needs new members. I chatted with Rick Petrie of Atlantic Partners EMS, which is a nonprofit organization that works with all aspects of emergency medical services, including providing education and acting as a source for personal protective equipment, or PPEs, in the COVID-19 pandemic, among many, many other functions. So tell us a little bit about the training involved in emergency medical services. I would think that it's extensive and that you need a lot of updating.
It really is. When you look at the entry level for EMT, the emergency medical technician class is about 120 hours in length of actual classroom time. And that doesn't involve the time they spend when they're not in class with research and online and things like that. And then you work your way up through advanced EMT and then paramedic. So it could take you the better part of 2 years to finish all of the training all the way through and get to the paramedic level. And then there's a requirement that our licenses right now as individual providers are good for 3 years, and you have to get a certain amount of continuing education hours in order to renew your license every 3 years. And that changes based on the level that you're at. If you're at the EMT level, it's a certain amount of hours that you have to get within 3 years, and then at paramedic levels is a bit more. And so there's the continuing medical education you have to get, and then there's the regular on-the-job learning that happens all the time that are operational in nature with your local service or policies and procedures or local protocols. So really, working in emergency medical services is a commitment to lifelong learning. Things change all the time.
And keeping up with all those changes, it's a matter of life and death. You don't want to fall behind.
You don't want to fall behind. You really want to be on the cutting edge of what works and what doesn't work, and being able to assess a patient and pick up subtle signs and symptoms that will lead you down the right path is critically important.
What are some of the qualities that you think are necessary for being successful in the emergency medical field?
I think that you have to have a modified type A personality. You have to be able to be comfortable in very difficult situations, because a key component of our care is instilling confidence in your patient.
Right.
So the patient feels comfortable that you're there, that you're going to help them. And so you have to be confident and professional without being overly aggressive, right?
Yeah.
And so you have to have a nice balance of how you interact with patients to make them feel like they're safe and they're comfortable with you. And you have to have a commitment to the lifelong learning that we spoke about. You have to be willing to stay up on newest trends and newest literature, and be willing to practice those things that you don't do on a regular basis so that you're ready. We have a fair amount of our procedures and skills and thought processes that are what we refer to as low utilization but critically important. Right?
Okay.
There are things that, when you look at a paramedics are trained even to do some surgical procedures. Cricothyrotomy, of opening up somebody's windpipe to insert an airway,
right,
is something that's critically important at the moment that you're doing it, but it's not something you do on a daily basis. So you have to have a commitment to staying current with that skill and
right,
good at that skill. And the same is true with managing cardiac arrest patients and managing anaphylactic patients and managing stroke patients. And so you have to have a good personality to be able to do this and really want to help people, because all those procedures and those types of calls that I just described do not make up the majority of our calls. The majority of our calls is providing comfort to patients. When we respond to a call in a community with that individual patient, that's the most important thing that's going on in their life right now.
right.
And then a lot of times they're scared, they're unnerved by whatever's going on, and they're reaching out. And there may not be something critically important that we have to do with that patient right now to save their life, but what is critically important is that we're there for them.
Right.
You're there for them, and you're providing comfort and a sense of feeling like everything's going to be okay.
Yeah.
And that's really critically important. The psychological first aid piece of being some of the most rewarding calls I've been on in my career have just involved holding somebody's hand or comforting somebody and helping them work through the process. And so all of those things are really important for being a provider.
I would think it would be very challenging. Obviously, you see some pretty horrific things in that job. And to be able to be professional in that position and kind of detach yourself from what's going on and at the same time be there for that person.
There's job can be very challenging. We interact with people in some of the worst times of their lives.
Right.
We deal with death on a regular basis, and we deal with abuse on a regular basis, or devastating life changes for people. And there are some things that we get into that are just emotionally and physically and psychologically draining. And the hard part about this job that people don't understand is that if you read about something in the newspaper, which is out there on a regular basis, anytime something bad happens, there's always going to be media coverage.
Right.
And if you read about that as a citizen, think, oh my God, that's terrible.
Right.
I can't imagine. Well, the reality is you can imagine. Your brain won't let you go there.
Yeah.
It won't let you go to just how bad that situation was.
Right.
There was a case a little while ago where a child was struck while they were going to school in a crosswalk and was killed.
Right.
And unfortunately, a local reporter who arrived on the scene fairly quickly started live streaming audio from the scene and had the audio on as the mother, who just lived up the road, somebody ran to her house and told her that her son had been struck.
Yeah.
And the reporter was live streaming the audio. And when the mother arrived on the scene, nobody should hear that
Right.
noise. Nobody should hear that sound.
Right.
EMS providers who have heard that sound, public safety providers who have heard that sound, live with that for the rest of their life.
Right.
That's a sound and that's a feeling that cannot be described.
Right. Yeah.
So we have public safety providers who are responding and seeing and hearing this on a daily basis. And we have a suicide problem in public safety. We have a depression problem. We have a burnout problem.
Yeah.
And because at the very base of this is that EMS providers are normal people,
right?
They're ordinary people that do extraordinary work, and that's hard. On the other end of the spectrum, there are things that we do that are just life-changing from a positive standpoint. We deliver babies. I can't tell you what that's like. I can't even begin to describe to you how wonderful that is. There are cardiac arrest patients who are alive today because of the public safety people that responded and their commitment, who've lived to celebrate another birthday, to celebrate another anniversary, to watch their kids grow up. And I can't tell you what that does to you emotionally as well, from an uplifting standpoint.
So I would think, talking about the emotional toll that this job takes on you, that you appreciate what this Maine CDC is doing right now with the warm line and giving healthcare workers and EMS workers someplace where they can call and just kind of let it all out.
Yeah, I think that was great that Maine CDC set that up. And I think that was a nice addition to the existing programs that we had out there for both critical incident stress management and then peer support, in which a lot of our departments have peer support personnel who are trained within their departments. We've really started expanding this. We've had a critical incident stress management teams in place since 1987 in the state of Maine. And this was a nice addition at the right time to allow providers one more way to reach out for help.
Yeah.
And so that's been very good. And we've been focused on this for a while. There was a period of time in public safety where the expectation or the general conventional wisdom, if you will, was that if this stuff bothered you, you shouldn't be doing it,
mm-hmm.
right? And we've come to realize over the last 20 or 30 years that just cannot be the operating system, that we are, in fact, ordinary people doing extraordinary work, and we need to make sure that we're taking care of our psychological process, our mental health, as well as anything. And we have some really committed mental health professionals who understand public safety, which is critically important, that they need to understand what drives public safety if they're going to be that go-to person for them. And we have a bunch of paramedics, firefighters, EMTs, dispatchers, nurses, who also are trained as peer counselors because they bring that legitimacy to the table. And so it is critically important. And the other thing is everybody assumes that it's the bad incidents that are always the culprit, but the reality of it is that it can be even good instances that create a lot of adrenaline but have a good outcome even, right? That can create stress and long-term. There was a case years and years and years ago where there was a baby in Texas that fell down a well.
Right, I remember that.
Remember that? It took them like maybe 2.5 days to get to the child.
Yeah.
A long time. They had to dig a separate tunnel. And when they were done with the tunnel, they tied a rope around a firefighter, EMT, or firefighter paramedic who crawled down this narrow channel and extricated that child. Pulled that child out, and the child's alive and is doing well.
Right.
And a year later, the firefighter killed himself.
Oh, wow. I did not know that.
For 2 days or for 2.5 days, these people and these public safety providers, were on the edge of their seats. The adrenaline was just coursing through their body. And then when that firefighter EMT climbed down that hole to get the kid, he had no idea what he was going to find on the other end.
Right.
Or even if the child was alive, what kind of condition the kid was going to be in.
Right.
And he gets there, and then when he gets his hands on the child, and then now he's got to get back out again, right? And they pull him out, and he's still holding his breath, and then you hope that the kid does well. And so here's this positive event because they, performed this miraculous rescue. But the drain on that particular individual was tremendous.
I can imagine.
And nobody thought about that because everything came out okay.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, everyone thinks of him as a hero, but doesn't think about the fact that the stress of going in and then the stress of, okay, she's alive. I have to get her back out alive through this. Yeah, wow.
And we've had those terrible cases in Maine. Most recently, the 2 young girls that were beaten to death by their family members. And, we are not immune to this because we're in Maine.
Right.
We've had a number of cases over the years that have been very difficult and unfortunate.
So what's the COVID-19 landscape right now? This has to be scary going out into the field and you literally don't know what you're walking into because these people could be contagious but be non-symptomatic.
Right. Yeah, the landscape for us is difficult right now because there are so many moving parts, right? And at the very core of this is COVID-19 is this invisible enemy, for lack of a better word. COVID-19 for everybody is this invisible enemy. It's one thing if we had an earthquake or a massive explosion or something like that where you could see the danger, right? You could see the problem, you could feel it, and there was an end in sight, right? None of those things apply here across the board. You can't see this, you can't feel it, you can't smell it, you can't make assumptions about who might have it or who might not have it. So you have to walk into every situation assuming that it may be a COVID case, which causes you to burn through your PPE, which is in short supply, and we can't get our hands on it. I mean, we're struggling out there. I get calls or emails daily from services saying we need masks or we need gowns or we need gloves, and we spend a significant amount of time trying to help them find that stuff. And then when we go on a critical call, a cardiac arrest, where somebody who normally you wouldn't expect to see in cardiac arrest, and you're wearing full PPE in the middle of this, and it gets torn or it's pulled off, and so now you're exposed. And so we see that level of tragedy that we're dealing with. But then the underlying thing in the back of your head is, when I go home, what am I carrying home with me? Right. And I may have been exposed and not even know that I was exposed.
And now I'm exposing my family to it.
And now I'm exposing my family or somebody else who's vulnerable. And now you see this creeping in about the kids who are catching this illness, this immune response with kids that hasn't really hit us here, but that weighs on you every day. And so, what am I contributing to? Family member becoming ill or another coworker becoming ill? And will I end up in the hospital as somebody who's critically ill? Right. And there doesn't appear to be a clear thing of saying that you will or you won't, right? I mean, certainly if you're immunocompromised or you're older or you're more susceptible to becoming critically ill. Right. But there are enough cases out there of people who are young and didn't seem to have any kind of difficulty or vulnerability, right, that have ended up in a hospital critically ill. Wow. And we know that, we sense that. And then when one of your coworkers is affected by this, it's the same as if one of your coworkers was killed in the line of duty. All of a sudden what it does is it exposes your vulnerability. Right. And we dwell on that stuff. We think about that stuff. It really drives us. Yeah.
So paramedics, EMTs right now, when they're going out on calls, are wearing personal protective equipment on every call, I assume?
If there's any reason at all, we're doing what we call, our dispatchers are all very highly trained, and they're asking a number of questions trying to sort this out as much as they can. And so then the crews are getting a code when they're responding to tell them, what the answers to those questions are, and so that they can try to be better prepared. But we still have a number of cases where the information that was given to the dispatchers is not accurate. And so we really have taken this cautious approach to assuming that all of our patients either are COVID positive or have been exposed to somebody who's COVID positive or have concerning signs or symptoms. And it's just the safer thing to do. Yeah.
Well, our thoughts are certainly with everybody going out and doing that. For lack of a better word, what a scary landscape to be walking out into on a daily basis. Just one added thing you have to worry about.
It's not like if you walked in and there was somebody standing there with a knife or a gun.
Right.
You know how to watch for that. You know how to look for that. And you know how to deal with that, right? I mean, that's clear danger. You know what that is. And this is not. You may get all done with a call and have no idea that you were even exposed to danger.
Right. And then you're going out on subsequent calls.
Another call.
Yeah.
Right.
And if you've been infected, then worry about that too.
Right.
Wow. But we don't want that to discourage people from calling if they need help.
No, and that's one of the problems is we saw a dramatic drop-off in people calling for ambulances and going to emergency departments. And now what we're seeing is the people that are calling for ambulances and going to emergency departments have a higher acuity.
What does that mean?
They're more ill.
Okay.
More seriously ill because they waited. They didn't call, and they should have. And so we're very concerned about that. People should call for an ambulance because our crews are going above and beyond. After every patient, they scrub the ambulances. They decontaminate everything and going through very thorough process to make sure that they're safe to respond on the next call.
So how about the EMS career path? Is there a shortage right now? Are you having a tough time getting people interested in following that path?
We've been having a problem for a little while because fewer people seem to want to get into public safety as a rule. We're seeing it with EMS, but we're also seeing it with fire, police, and dispatch. Fewer people want to get into the job, and it's a very difficult job. And so we've been struggling for a while. We have a very difficult time getting volunteers. We have half the amount of volunteers we had 10 years ago.
Wow.
And we have services in the state, maybe have 15, 18, 20 people on the roster, but they have 3 or 4 people that respond on a regular basis. And it's hard to be a volunteer EMS provider now. And it's hard to be in this field because you have to be on your game all the time. You have to be learning all the time. The commitment is much more than it ever was before because of safety and continuing education and requirements and all that stuff. At the same time, that I have to be perfectly honest with you, the pay is terrible. It's horrible. And
that's not right. Given what you do,
that's not right.
Yeah,
it's just really, really bad, and it's not because the people that employ the public safety providers don't want to pay them; it's they can't. Yeah. Somewhere around 70 to 72% of the ambulance calls in the state of Maine are paid for by Medicare or Maine Care.
Right.
And in the last year, we got a significant increase in funding from Maine Care to equal what Medicare pays us for calls, right?
Yeah.
The problem is that Medicare reimburses us about 85% of what it costs to go on a call, to do a call. So right off the bat, every time that ambulance rolls on a call, the reimbursement is less than it costs for that ambulance to go on a call.
Right.
So the net result is that all of the ambulance services in the state of Maine have to be subsidized by somebody, hospitals or to a small extent, but the bigger one is municipalities, right?
Right.
And so there isn't anybody out there, if you ask them, probably, who wouldn't want to pay, EMS providers, what they should be paid. They just can't do it because the money's not there.
What would you say to someone who's listening and says, I think that's something I want to do? What words of encouragement can you give them that it is something they want to do?
It is something you want to do. I got to tell you that I've been doing this for 40 years, and I can't imagine doing anything else in my life because it has been tremendously fulfilling. When you take the good with the bad, is that you are reaching out, you are helping people in their time of need, and in some cases in the darkest point of their life, and you are there as something to help them through that.
Right.
And I can't imagine having done anything else with my career or my life. It is a tremendously fulfilling job. And yes, you have to have a commitment to lifelong learning, but there are some really good benefits that come with this. And whether it be giving back to your community, helping people in times of need, and many of our EMS agencies are involved in public information and education as well, injury prevention. So they're in their community teaching people about things like how to stop bleeding and how to do CPR and playground safety and bike safety. At the very core of this, as a public safety provider, what you're doing is helping your communities and helping your neighbors and friends and even people you don't know work through some of the most difficult or darkest periods of their life. And it's just really, really rewarding.
Rick says anyone who's thinking of getting involved in emergency medical services should contact their local EMS provider or fire department to get more information about the nearest training center. He says they'd be welcomed with open arms. And you can find more information about Atlantic Partners at apems.org. I'm Cindy Campbell. Enjoy the rest of your weekend and stay healthy.
Join us again next weekend for Maine Concerns with your Townsquare Media News team.